Hello everybody, welcome to Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the second album from Boards of Canada, Geogaddi. Okay, so it seems this review in particular has been pretty highly anticipated. Looking in the comment section of my Music Has the Right to Children review, it seems this is most people's favorite Boards of Canada release, and not that one. Now, maybe some people remember my favorites of all time list and my including this album on it, but Music Has the Right to Children was ranked significantly higher. I also mentioned in my Music Has the Right review that BOC are very much mood music for me and that I need to be in a certain mood to enjoy some of their albums. Although it's not nearly as important for Music Has the Right to Children. And that does come into play with Geogaddi. Because I'm just going to put this out there, the past couple of days haven't been that great for me, and I don't really know what happened, but my enjoyment of this album went down a significant amount, like 6.7, solid 7 range. I'm obviously not going to include that as my final rating, because I know that is entirely dependent on my mood and nothing else. Because, let's face it, Geogaddi is probably BOC's biggest downer of an album. It's significantly more demented and foreboding than their usual work, and that should be saying something. But regardless, I have returned to it with quite a bit of frequency, and I still thought it was good enough to include in my favorites of all time list. And regardless of my mood in the past couple of days, I'm going to review this as if that just didn't happen. I'll try my best. So anyway, I think the one thing about Geogaddi that takes it a step down from Music Has the Right for me is the fact that there's a lot more short interlude tracks on this album, and to be honest, I don't think some of them are quite as memorable as the ones on Music Has the Right. And on the other hand, Music Has the Right also had some similar sounding tracks, like Eagle in Your Mind and Telephasic Workshop, and Geogaddi does not have this problem. The real meat of this album, the stuff that keeps me coming in for repeat visits, are the longer tracks. And to be fair, while a lot of the interludes go in one ear and out the other, I'd be lying if I said I ever skipped them. I'll cover those first, because there's a lot of them, and they actually offer probably the most material to discuss on this album. Ready, let's go! Neat intro, nothing special to be honest. In the Annex and I Saw Drones don't have a ton of interest. Like, there's some harsh and fluttery synth melodies. They're alright. But, they never really did much of anything for me personally outside of bridge, bigger and better tracks. Beware the Friendly Stranger and The Smallest Weird Number are like a couple of flute notes that play quickly, the former being a bit creepier, and the latter being a bit more memorable. I've finally started to notice when this track happens, and I think that works in its favor. We got Dandelion, which features a sample of Leslie Nielsen, of all people, narrating a National Geographic special on volcanic activity. Though, to be honest, he sounds fairly anonymous, and I had to look it up in order to find out it was him. Definitely one of the more easily recognizable interludes on here. We got Energy Warning, which is kind of what it says on the tin. A little kid narrating a PSA on conserving energy over some synths and helicopter sounds. Oh, and the kid's voice is totally monotone and squished into the worst audio quality for that extra tidbit of inhumanity. It's not a bad thing, that's kind of the point. Opening the Mouth is another that I only recently noticed was not a part of the track, The Beach at Redpoint. Like, it's these fluttering and almost atonal flutes that remind me a little bit of the Kraftwerk song Tone Mountain from their Ralph and Florian album, over some strong wind sound effects. Cool atmosphere, and once I actually started to notice it was there, I liked it a lot more than I did previously, but it has taken me several years to notice it existed. Then we get A is to B as B is to C, which I'm not that disappointed I never noticed, because despite being less than 2 minutes long, is like 3 or 4 songs in one. The variety of wavy synth pads at the beginning, the cheerful but dated melody in the middle, mixed with 8-tonal vocoder counting, the reverse samples right after that, one of which gets particularly demonic sounding at the end. I think the track is like somewhat of an extreme case of the track Karn Marth by Aphex Twin from his Richard D. James album, because everything happens so quickly that I don't even notice anything happened at all. But I will definitely give that track points for being interesting. So, thumbs up there. And right after that, it's followed by another minute-long track, Over the Horizon Radar, which I admittedly like more. It's got a peaceful but sad kind of synth melody that's a nice contrast with the madness of the previous track. But the last main interlude on this album, Diving Station, is also probably my favorite of the interludes as well. It's got these creepy, low-end synth patterns combined with these nice pianos. It's some cool stuff. I suppose if you want to count it as an interlude, there's also the album's ending, the track Magic Window, which is entirely silent. Now, I can't say I'm entirely satisfied by the album ending in 1 minute and 46 seconds of complete silence, but I do understand why it's there. On the vinyl version, which I believe is like a minute longer or something, it takes up an entire album side, which is completely uncut, aside from an etching of a small family. A small, naked family. Okay then. But on the CD version, it exists to get the album to a particular length, which, I shit you not, is 66 minutes and 6 seconds. Or on my version, 66 minutes and 5 seconds, but close enough. Yay for Satanism references. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, this album's length would make one very important thought make sense, as if neurotic moms found out about this detail, they'd want to keep it away from their kids. At least if it weren't for the fact that this came out several years after Music Has the Right to Children. So, never mind. Oh, and before I forget, my version of the album also contains a bonus track called From One Source All Things Depend, which has some little kids reciting prayers and talking about what they think about God with some synths that sound like church organs. It's cute, I guess, but I almost never actually listen to it. Once I hit Magic Window, I'm usually like, okay, album's over, that was fun, let's listen to something else. Regardless, even if they don't offer me the same extent of personal enjoyment that the longer standouts do, I never want the interludes removed. They certainly offered me no shortage of material to talk about. Heck, I probably have more to say about them than I do about my actual favorite tracks, but I digress. But now that I've discussed the pile of interludes on the album, it's finally time to get into the meat of the album and discuss the longer tracks. The only non-interlude track on here that I wouldn't consider a personal favorite is Gyroscope. Gyroscope is definitely one of the creepiest tracks on here, with an almost arrhythmic beat over creepy synths and some little lo-fi audio kid who sounds like he's being forced to recite numbers at gunpoint. Like, I'm not going to say I don't like this track or that I think it's bad in any way. Like, it's definitely one of the go-to tracks when demonstrating the differences between Geogaddi and Music Has the Right to Children and showing how fucked up this album can get. But something about the tone of this kid's voice really bugs me, and I don't enjoy it quite as much as the other longer tracks on here. I mean, it's not a bad track, but it's not a personal favorite of mine. That's all. The rest on here, though, basically you got one great creepy melody after another. Music as Math isn't super creepy, and maybe not the world's most indicative opener, but it is definitely one of the more fun tracks on here. And Sunshine Recorder does not particularly live up to its title, because of course it doesn't. Some cool melodies that aren't a huge step away from Aquarius, but are of course much darker and more sonorous as well, complete with unrecognizable kid samples. Now I'm thinking on it, I think this album uses the kid voice samples a lot more than Music Has the Right to Children did, like by a long shot, but moving on. We got Julian Candy, which is another track that's kind of like Sunshine Recorder, and then it's noticeably creepier than the usual, but the flute melodies are great. And the creepy, low-quality orchestral samples are a nice touch as well, another easy favorite of mine. And 1969 is Easily the catchiest track on the whole album. Between the creepy ascending synths and weird modulated vocals at the beginning to, of course, the vocoders at the end, constantly intoning 1969 in the sunshine in one of the most monotone and emotionless voices you can get. That line, 1969 in the sunshine, has played through my head for entire days at a time before, and very few Boards of Canada songs can pull off something like that. And believe it or not, there's other ones that have had almost the same effect. For instance, The Devil in the Details. The repetitive synth pattern on this one is weirdly catchy. And of course the audio crackling and maybe reversed vocals certainly don't hurt the track either. And the track Dawn Chorus is also particularly catchy, and also weirdly a little more lighthearted and maybe happier than most of the tracks on here. At the very least it's in a major key, even though it's covered in all the same harsh synth tones that the rest of the album uses. Other highlights that may not get lodged in my head as easily, but are still great, include The Beach at Redpoint, which has these really nice string pads that remind me a tad of the final track on Selected Ambient Works Volume 2, albeit much fuzzier and less dramatic. There's also Alpha and Omega, which isn't particularly catchy, but is a lot of fun to listen to. The acid house-ish synth melodies, the Indian percussion, flutes, one of the ascending synth lines from Aquarius, and the most disturbing line on the entire album. Yellow. As in, the zombie version of orange. You sick bastards! Regardless, while this track doesn't get stuck in my head all that easily, it's one I return to a lot. Definitely a favorite. And that leaves the ending of this album. We got You Could Feel the Sky, which has an off-kilter and bumpy beat, but also lots of scratchy but warm ambience, and nice flute sounds every now and then. Finally, there's Corsair, which is kinda like this album's equivalent to Open the Light. An entirely beatless track that is just one ambient synth pad. Not a bad place to finish the album. So yeah, overall, not much to complain here. There's a ton of material in this album, and there's a lot to discuss. It's certainly one of the most unique albums out there, sounding like going through the archives of a radio tower while being stalked by someone. A random sampling of the darkest and most inhuman qualities of humanity, somehow presented in a relatively easy to digest fashion. On one hand, I will admit I've not always been in the mood for this album, and that is definitely been the case in the past couple of days, even though it may not really sound like it from the tone of this review. And because of that, I still much prefer Music Has the Right to Children. That album, for me, is the kind of album that I can basically get into anytime. But Geogaddi, on the other hand, is probably the most interesting of their releases. It's like nothing else out there, and it might not be my personal favorite album of all time or anything, but it is still on that list, and for good reason. I'm overall feeling an 8.5 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.